Evening, everyone. So, yes, I thought we've had some little questions regarding the budget, but I thought we'd have a little discussion about whether or not Liz Truss is genuinely insane, and I mean that literally, or if she's just pretending. This was something that came up during Brexit. You know, there were Tory MPs, once they had to tilt towards being pro-Brexit, there were those who knew it was insane, but they did it for their own personal political power or just for the good of the party or whatever. So they were the ones that were pretending to be mad, and some others were actually just mad. So what I'll do, and obviously we'll bring the budget statement, but it's not the only policy, into this. So from my point of view, we can look at three possibilities. People can try and suggest others if they like. The first possibility is that Liz Truss is fairly clued up and she's just doing this for her own personal power. If that is the case, then I would have to conclude that she's happy just being Prime Minister for a couple of years, because the course she is on is going to see her lose the next election. The other possibility is that she does believe the policies that she's putting in place. She actually thinks that they will grow the economy, for example. Now, it has to be remembered. See, I think it's very difficult to get a handle on exactly what Liz Truss believes. It's very much like Boris Johnson. You know, except Boris Johnson probably didn't have too many firm views at all. A lot of people make a lot of the fact that, you know, Liz Truss is now this die-hard Brexiteer, but in 2016 she was campaigning for Remain. In fact, she was quite dismissive of Brexit. So does that mean that she was really a Remainer who tilted to Brexit because that's the way the wind was blowing, like so many other Tory MPs? How do we know she didn't tilt to being a Remainer? How do we know she wasn't really a die-hard Brexiteer who supported Remain because that's what the Tory leadership did at the time? It's very difficult to know. But one thing that Liz Truss is involved in, so we talked about, there's a book called Britannia Unchained, and it's probably the most famous political book I've never read. I've not actually read it. I've read excerpts from it. Maybe I should read it to see the full horror of what's going on. In fact, maybe I should. But it was a book written by 5 what are now senior Tory MPs, or influential Tory MPs. And when Boris Johnson came to government, it came back to the fore, because Priti Patel and Dominic Raab were 2 of those authors, and they were promoted into very senior positions. So Dominic Raab obviously was Foreign Secretary to begin with, and Priti Patel remained Home Secretary throughout Johnson's tenure. And it included, it was a very far-right set of ideologies. Nothing new, nothing innovative. It was basically distilled Reaganomics. It's very much like if you distill down Tory core, very far right-wing beliefs. That's what it was. But the thing is, there were other authors as well. 2 of the other authors were Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So it was one thing having Dominic Raab and Priti Patel, 2 of the authors, who, by the way, called the British worker the worst idlers in the world. It's one thing having those in senior positions of power. Now we've got 2 of the authors, that's the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So although you can look at the situation, and I frequently do look at the situation and think Liz Truss tilted to the far right because that was the only support she was going to get. She wasn't going to get moderate support in the party. She'd have never gotten to the final ballot. She would never have become Prime Minister. So she tilted to the right, very much like Boris Johnson did, because that was the support that was up for sale. But it could be she really is very far right wing, you know. But we'll go through some things. So basically, the topic of the conversation is going to be, you know, what is there that would indicate that she is just going along with this for her own personal power, or to what extent could she believe it? Because I'll throw one more thing into the mix as well. Now, again, every time I bring this man, he's not a reliable character witness, of course, but Dominic Cummings. Dominic Cummings, it's not just that he has a dim view of Liz Truss, he has a dim view of lots of Tory MPs. It's quite bizarre. He's built his career on being employed by Tory MPs, and yet he hates them. He absolutely hates them. But Cummings thinks that Truss is the maddest person he's met in Westminster. He has said, quote, he's described her as mad as a box of snakes. And, but this was the big one for me, Dominic Cummings described Liz Truss. He said she was as close to properly crackers as anybody he's met in Parliament. Now, bear in mind, he must have met Desmond Swayne and Michael Fabricant, as well as Mark Francois. He has met those people, and yet he considers, if we assume he's telling the truth, and what reason is there to lie? If he's going to pick on someone he thinks, in his view, is the maddest politician he's ever met in Westminster, if she's too insane for Dominic Cummings, I mean, she really could believe it. Liz Truss argues that it was Dominic Raab who wrote the Idler chapter, doesn't she? I don't know, I don't care, it doesn't really matter. They all put their names to it. All of them would have, when it was completed, read it through and made sure they were happy with it before it went off. You know, it doesn't matter who wrote which chapter, all of them put their name to it. It's a bit like when you put your name, you sign an open letter. You know, one person's probably written the letter, you know, with consultation with the rest. But everyone who puts their name to that letter is stating that that is their view. You know, there can't be anything you disagree with because your name's on it. How many Remainers actually regret voting Remain? I don't think they actually exist. No, I don't. I mean, they'll always be able to dig up someone who'll claim to vote to have backed Remain. But there it is. You know, so and here's the thing. I'm actually finding myself wondering, which would I prefer? Would I prefer it if Liz Truss is just going along with this because it's how she got to become Prime Minister? And and you can understand it from some people's point of view. Some people would be delighted, you know, be a Prime Minister for a couple of years. She's been an MP for a reasonable amount of time, I suppose. So she'll get a bit of a pension. She opens up she'll get to write memoirs, even though she'll have only, like Boris Johnson will be paid a fortune for his memoirs. He was only Prime Minister for a few years. He'll get paid a fortune. Liz Truss, if she's only Prime Minister for 2.5 years, she'll still be paid a fortune. In fact, if Liz Truss is only Prime Minister for a year, let us imagine that they did get rid of her next summer. She would get a huge amount of money for her memoirs, even though it's only for a year, because it would be a year of the most chaotic period in British government history, probably. I'm not a historian, but certainly in my lifetime. You'll bet people will want to know what went on, you know, behind closed doors. It doesn't even matter if what she's saying is the truth. In fact, she'd be better off embellishing it. She'll be able to do the speech circuit. She'll be able to do all sorts of things because she's now positioned herself as the person who, you know how they claim, oh, Brexit, the reason Brexit's not gone well is because they didn't do it properly. They did it half-assed. She's doing the same with Reaganomics, because that's also worth bearing in mind as well. Like, you know, we can look at what Liz Truss is trying to do with the economy and think, well, how can she possibly think she's surrounded by experts who will be pointing out exactly what I have, only in more detail, because they've got a greater level of expertise than I have, exactly how it cannot grow the economy. But you think to yourself, but this idea of trickle-down economics was taken seriously by clever people in the past. Now, imagine the scenario. Imagine you've got some actually clever people who genuinely think trickle-down theory does work, but you can't do it in a half-assed way. That's possible. It is possible for, you know, a policy, if you don't really commit to it, that it fails. You know, I remember, like in judo, we were taught, you know, you can't just throw your opponent to the ground and expect to retain your own balance, because you're not committing yourself enough. You're more likely to fail. So you have to commit yourself. You have to throw yourself into the ground. The trick in judo is to throw yourself to the ground and make sure your opponent ends up underneath. You know, the same thing can apply with an economic theory. If you do it in a half-arse way, maybe it doesn't work. And maybe if you've got someone who's just about bright enough to understand that economic theory, but they fail to understand that if you are going to test it out, you need ideal conditions. You know how in you know, if you're going to, for example, do a rocket launch, you wouldn't do it if it's incredibly windy. You know, if there's adverse weather conditions, you cancel it, you postpone it till later. You know, there's things like that. It's like, even if something will work, there are certain conditions under which you wouldn't try it, because everything will be against you. So, you know, she may just be bright enough to understand the theory and believe in it, but maybe not aware that if there is any chance of it ever working, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, with sky high inflation, negative growth, and with the global economy not doing well either, so your potential for growth is limited anyway, because the whole world is effectively is heading into a little bit of a recession. I don't actually know what the global situation is, whether it is technically recession or growth, but nonetheless it's depressed growth if it's still growth. You know, so the conditions are, even if it could work, they're not there. It's not the right time. I mean, I don't think it would ever be the right time, but still. But anyway, let's go on with some comments. So we've had 2 female Tory prime ministers promoting Brexit. Who actually campaigned for Remain? Yeah. How do I assess the difference? Theresa May was doing it purely for the party. She was someone who prioritised the party above everything else, right? That's why she was doing it. She was too weak to She was too weak to see that the party was taken over by the ERG. She was too weak to stand up to them, but she was doing it for the sake of the party. Liz Truss cannot be, and it doesn't matter whether she's just going along with this for personal gain, in which case she's clearly not prioritising the party, or if she's going ahead with this because she really believes fundamentally that it will somehow work, because she knows that it's causing a lot of angst amongst her MPs. And bear in mind, the reason that quite a lot of Tory MPs are not happy about that budget statement yesterday is not because all of a sudden the poll rating went down. It didn't. This week, you know, on YouGov anyway, the Tories have closed the gap a little bit more with Labour. Labour still firmly ahead, but still closed a little bit more. She is still getting her bounce back, which would be expected. She's still getting that. And the reason is the policies that were announced yesterday aren't instantly unpopular. The idea of cutting taxes for the rich is not that popular. But it's not that their overall package is not that popular. A lot of the public are looking at it right now and going, okay, you say this is going to lead to growth. Let's see then. Whereas those Tory MPs know full well that when the public have decided they've had enough time to see, they will not see growth. So that's why those Tory MPs are a little bit frantic right now. It's not that there's been an immediate negative impact in the polls. It's that they know it's inevitable. Elon Musk once launched a rocket in cloudy weather and let it explode. Yes, but here's the thing. If Elon Musk, if anything, is crazier than Liz Truss. He just has some skills that are marketable, that's all. Whereas Liz Truss, the only skills she has are the sort of things that only in politics could you make any money out of. If Liz Truss had never entered politics, she would be one of the people on benefits being screwed over by her own party right now. I referenced Doctor Who 2 days ago. I referenced it a lot. Tom Baker, the best one. No. Not even in the top 5. But anyway, went downhill when the vet took him. No, Peter Davison was awesome. Can we use the TARDIS to sort this out? No. Peter Davison was there. In fact, it's a shame that Peter Davison didn't play the Doctor in the way that he did, unfortunately, in his very last one, Caves of Androzani, because that was superb. That's what I've wanted all along, a sarcastic doctor, but never mind. Commerce and economies are like Mother Nature. They like to fill the vacuum. We've created a vacuum, ergo it'll be extremely difficult to break back into any market. Well, we've put barriers in the way. We've put barriers in the way. There's like customers, and it's like, oh, it's harder to get to them now. So of course we can't sell as much. All these people go, oh no, exports are higher than they've ever been. No, they're not. That's just in terms of the number of pounds we're selling them for. But the pound isn't worth as much as it was, even like, the pound's not worth as much as it was yesterday, for goodness sake. So of course the value of our exports in pounds is going up, because you sell the same amount of stuff and it looks like you're selling more in pounds. But in real terms, it's down. And how could it be any different? Quite understandably, we're focusing on the economy. What about the planning reforms? Disastrous for ecology and probably heritage. Yeah, they are. Actually, the RSPB is spitting feathers, if you'll pardon the pun. They're not impressed about these announcements. The thing about the planning permissions, though, is it's actually quite hard to persuade the voting public that these are bad. You know, the conservatives, and conservatives the world over, are, because remember, you know, they've basically bought the media, and they've basically convinced people that like red tape is bad, or regulations are bad. It's how they got Brexit through, even though we've now got more red tape. But so if you, the government, they characterize it as, you know, these great projects, and they get held up with this laborious planning permissions and blah blah blah. It takes ages, and it means we don't get the benefits for years afterwards. And it's like, yeah, but the reason they do that is to make sure that they are great projects. Like, how do you know which is a great project unless you look at it? But they don't characterize it like that. So the thing is, there'd be no point in, say, Labour, for example, or even the Lib Dems, trying to attack this reform on planning permission. Yes, it's a disaster. You won't persuade people of it. They'll be told it's a way of speeding up these great projects that are going to create jobs and all the rest of it, and there'll be no way of persuading them otherwise. So that's the sort of one you just have to leave alone. Whereas if you know, a chancellor announces a budget where he's going to cut taxes for the rich but not the poor, and the price of everything is going up, you know, so the net impact is that you end up with people on like normal working people, or not even low incomes, ordinary incomes, median incomes, higher than median incomes. You can be on £40,000 a year, and your cost of living in the last year alone has gone up massively. And part of that is because the value of the pound in your pocket has gone down by 21%. You know, a pound coin, oh, here's one. A pound coin that you might have had a year ago is now effectively worth 79 pence. That pound coin is worth 79 pence in a year ago's money. So of course things are going up. Of course things are going up in price. If nothing else, I mean, there's plenty of other things causing the price to go up, but if nothing else, it's because the pound isn't worth as much. Maybe she's being a nutter to be in and out quick and then milk the cash as soon as you can. Well, maybe. See, this is it, right? So possibilities. Is Liz Truss mad or not? Possibility one, she is actually mad. She believes in all this. She thinks, give it a year and the economy will actually have grown. This recession, the Bank of England saying year and a half recession. No, next year we'll be into growth and everything will be wonderful, and she'll be able to show these green shoots of recovery, as Osborne used to call it. And the jobs are coming, you know, and she maybe believes that. And she may be as surprised as anyone else when it doesn't happen. Obviously, then she's not going to turn around and go, oh, I got that wrong. She'll just say, oh, it's actually their fault or their fault or their fault. She'll blame the Chinese or the Americans or the EU or Labour. You know, she'll blame someone else. The lefty woke media. She'll blame someone else. But she may be genuinely surprised. Second possibility. She doesn't believe it, and she's just fancying being Prime Minister just to enrich herself. She will leave office to very lucrative jobs. She'll get, like, very often it's quite common for ministers who are a bit dodgy to end up with like positions on non-executive positions on boards, you know, for big, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. She gives some tax breaks to powerful corporations. They give her a job where she doesn't have to do any work, but she gets a stipend for it. You know, she'll be rolling in money after this. She'll be rolling in it. And it doesn't matter how short her tenure is even. In fact, the shorter, in some ways, the better, because it'll be more sensational. And as I say, she'll get more money for those books. And she could write loads on it. Because, you know, she's also been a cabinet minister, remember, under 3 previous prime ministers. She was a cabinet minister in, I think she was a cabinet minister under David Cameron as well as Theresa May and Boris Johnson. So she could write a whole series of books, all the scandals. But then there's a third possibility. The third possibility is she is doing it for the party, and what she's thinking is, right, because she's been strategic, because she's not stupid, and she isn't that stupid. She's not clever, but she's not that stupid. And she thinks to herself, right, we're not winning the next election. We've messed it up. There's no way of recovering the economy with Tory economics. They understand that. They get that. It's not happening. So what you do is you salt the earth. You completely bugger up the economy so that when Labour inevitably take over, there's nothing they can do. Now, in reality, that's not quite true, because if they're forced where they can't do anything with the current economic model, you may actually just be forcing them to change the economic model and become more radical than they really want to be. But Nadine Dorries could ghostwrite them free. Oh yeah, why not? Why not? Yeah, that's the point. Dominic Cummings must have met Nadine Dorries. And yet, she is the maddest person he's come across in Westminster. Really? How insane must she be? She must be a very functioning, crazy person. But there we go. Well, you say first episode of Doctor Who with William Hartnell was shown the same night JFK was shot. It was sort of, not really. JFK was shot on the 22nd of November, and the first episode of Doctor Who was on Saturday the 23rd of November at 5:15 p.m. But obviously with American time and British time, it may have sort of worked out roughly weird. But I don't know. I wasn't around. But the... she may think there's a vote winner to be found, as Brexit proved to be. I really don't think she's been at all strategic here. No. What she's doing right now is completely unchained, pun intended, far-right Tory ideology. Like, normally you have had people who've been fairly far-right wing before, and they sort of understand a political leader who wants to win power has to understand what voters want them to do, or what voters want to perceive them as wanting to do. So you have to always have an eye on the polls, basically. How is this playing to voters, key target voters, not just the general population, but the voters who will determine your success or failure? Liz Truss is not doing that. She's not doing that. She's forging ahead with this mad plan, which, as I say, even if you believed in it, the circumstances are all wrong. If you were going to do this thing and you were convinced it's right, but you knew full well that lots and lots of other people, including your own party, knew it was wrong, the only way for it to work, first of all, you'd need favourable conditions, market conditions. That means the world has to have been... it's in a slump at the moment. There's no getting away from it. It's in a slump. This is not a good time to be radically changing the economic playbook. Secondly, you'd need much longer to go at it. You'd need to do this straight after a general election with a nice majority and 5 years to get it done. Because right now, if she had 5 years, if she just won, if she had done what Boris Johnson did, if she won an election with a large majority or even a decent sized majority, she'd have the MPs on her side because she's won the majority, and they'd know the election's 5 years away, so they'd calm down. They wouldn't be as worried about you doing radical things. When MPs are staring at the next election, they're nearer the next election than the last one. That's when they're over the hill, basically. So they're now looking at the finish line, the next election. So what Liz Truss should actually do, if she was being strategic, is she would focus on trying to win the next election, which is not impossible. She could do things that wouldn't exactly be like Tory thinking. You know, she could do things to manage the situation politically, win the election, and then have 5 years to tilt the other way and put her economic theories into practice. And have 5 years, she would get at least 3 years of Tory MPs going along with it. She'd have at least 3 years of going along with it. It's when they start to see, it's when they get to the halfway point. It's when, because realistically, if you think about getting things done as a government, because things have to go through Parliament, so in your last year, you can't do anything. And the situation for MPs is this, that traditionally, you have a 4-year Parliament, like 5 years is the maximum, but you try and go to the election after 4 years. So there's a possibility of an election next year. In reality, I really don't think there will be. But there's a possibility of an election next autumn. Well, that means they're a year away. Well, if they're a year away, then the government don't have time to get very much through Parliament. And when the government are actually planning on having an election, they don't even try. At that point, they have to start, you know, they can't put long-term plans in place. They have to have short-term plans. Anything you do as a government, this is one of the downsides of democracy. Anything you do in government, you have to make sure there's a payout before the next election. So if you're going to put a long-term plan in, you have to do it at the start of the Parliament, not the end. You know, the closer you get to the end, the more short-term your measures have to be. But anyway, FDR radically changed the economic playbook in the 30s to recover from the Great Depression. So if anything, this is absolutely time to change it. The Tories are changing it for the worse, though. They are. I'm not entirely sure what media opposition FDR would have had in the American press, though. You know, the time to change it is now. The Tories won't change it. Well, they are changing it, but not in a way that is in any way likely to succeed, or is even, it's not even possible to succeed. As I say, the theory doesn't even stand up. You know, but as I say, there was a time when this sort of trickle-down theory hadn't been discredited and very clever people believed in it. And, you know, it's very probable that Liz Truss learnt about economic theory at the time. Like, don't imagine that Liz Truss has carried on learning because she's interested in it. You know, so you imagine there's plenty of politicians that do this on both sides of politics. They learn something in their younger days, right? They're eager, they learn about things, they set their mind on something. Maybe it's even the conventional view at the time. But then time passes, but they're focused on their political career. They're not changing their mind. They're increasingly set in their ways. And so it's quite conceivable that Liz Truss developed these economic ideas. Let's assume she genuinely holds them. She developed these economic ideas at a time where there was still a lot of credibility for them. And she just never bothered to read up the latest data, which shows that it's all tosh. And as I say, if all you did was learn some of the basics of it, which is all you need as a politician, but you never really thought about the detail, then you'll never consider, but are there maybe global market conditions that would make it more likely to work or less likely to work? You know, because if she's not a strategic thinker, and I really don't think she is, I think someone who was a clever strategic thinker would not be as disastrous in interviews and debates as she is. But anyway, could there be a snap spring election? I don't know. Like, Labour are still 8 points ahead. There's no way the Tories can go to the polls like this. You know, if you think about what's going to happen in spring. So what have we got between now and spring? First of all, energy bills are going up. It's all right, her saying she's capped them. They're going up. All she can say is they won't go up again next year, but they're going up in a week's time. Next thing, the strikes are still going on. It's all right them talking about, oh, we're going to bring in new rules so that pay offers have to go to the members. All right, fine, whatever. If the members still reject it, the members will still reject it. Bear in mind, the members have to reject it before the strike's authorised in the first place. So what difference that? All they're going to try and do there is try and restrict the ability for unions to hold strikes at all. That's what it is. It's about delaying them, or if they have a strike, delaying when they can have the next one, and so on. So that's all that's about. But they've got industrial action to deal with. The NHS winter crisis. But it won't just be an NHS winter crisis. It'll be a health and social care crisis completely, right? COVID will rear its ugly head again. And we're into recession now. We're now basically into recession. Officially, I suppose, I don't know, unless they've revised the economic data for the last quarter. I suppose technically we're not in recession until next spring, but we'll be in recession next spring. There's zero way that Labour, I cannot believe, even though Labour may not be playing this perfectly, they'd have to really mess up at this point, because so far they've actually done quite well in focusing on what, on the voting position, those key target voters, and now they've got something they can run with. The cost of living crisis is going to be a cost of living crisis all the way to 2025 and beyond. She has a plan, no matter how opaque to us now. She has a plan, but the thing is, it may not be opaque. It may be exactly what she's doing. Who knows? Didn't a certain party in the 1930s and 40s restrict unions from going on strike? Yeah, it's one of the classic fascist playbook measures. You restrict union activity. Absolutely. There's absolutely no doubt at all that the Conservative Party right now is a fascist organisation. Zero doubt in that. It doesn't necessarily mean we're run by a fascist government at the moment. Just because they've got fascist leanings doesn't mean they've taken enough control yet, but I absolutely believe that if they could put themselves in that position, they would. I have no doubts at all that we would be heading the same route as several other major European countries in the last century when they decided to give fascism a try. What I can never understand is why Italy keeps flirting with the idea after it went so disastrously wrong for them. But there it is. The margin for error in regards to Labour is a mile wide, open goal territory. All Starmer needs to do is keep the pressure up. Yeah, in a way, yeah, but at the same time, there is a danger sometimes, because here's the thing: when you're formulating policies, particularly for Labour, it applies to any party, but particularly for Labour, there are things that are in the best, or you strongly believe are in the best interests of the country, and that you would really like to implement, but they are not that popular and they could lose you votes. Now, there is an argument, if you are on for an absolutely stonking win and the opposition is nowhere, you can afford some of these. You can afford some policies that could be net vote losers if you believe it's not going to cost you the election. So classic examples of this. So let us say that, and Labour will, and they are doing really. So if you think about Labour seats, so there are three types of Labour seats really that they'll be targeting. I say targeting, expecting to win. So there's the big cities. Labour tend to do well there, particularly in the northern cities, of course. They get large majorities there. Then you've got the sort of more industrial North Wales, North England, North Midlands. They're obviously the Tories took a load of them, so they have to focus on those ones again. And then you've got your sort of more middle class areas all around the country, Scotland, England, Wales, all parts of England, you know. Now, and they're obviously tend to be quite marginal as well, because they will swing between Labour and the Conservatives. So if you take those northern cities, for example, particularly, where they get a large majority. Now, if Labour were to adopt some policies that are net vote losers amongst the sort of populations that live in those cities, well, they can get away with that because their majorities are so large they'll still retain the seat. Whereas they have to be very careful not to adopt any policies that are net vote losers, even small net vote losers, in, say, what we'd call the Red Wall, or those sort of more middle class, the ones that swing between Tory and Labour every now and then. You know, they have to be very careful with those ones because they need to win them. And remember, Labour are not in a position where they're looking at trying to get, it's not like the difference between getting a 30-seat majority and a 70-seat majority. They're really spectacularly unlikely to get any majority. I will admit, the way Liz Truss is carrying on, if the Tories don't do something, and I don't just mean get rid of her, but I think the best thing is to try and change her. If the Tories don't do something, I'm not going to get to this point yet, but I might at some point get to the point where I think all bets are off and maybe Labour could get a majority, but they can't get a good majority. So Labour have to fight for every seat. They can't even, you know, they can afford to lose some votes in areas where they've got a very strong majority. They cannot afford to lose even one seat. Could make the difference between getting an important piece of legislation through. If you look at Joe Biden, right, okay, his recent bill, you know, the economic bill, sort of eventually got passed, but there was a much more radical one he tried to get through, and it failed by a single vote. There was I think, was it just one Democrat? It must have been just one Democrat who voted against it because they were from like an industrial area that wasn't going to like it. You know, so one seat can make the difference between a particular piece of legislation getting through or having to be amended or just not getting through at all. If Labour win the general election, will they implement PR? I have no idea. I hope so. I really don't know. The thing is, there is a question about whether it is a net vote winner or a net vote loser. Empirically, you can argue both ways, but that's irrelevant. I don't know because what you need to know is what is it for those target voters, not the general population. The general population you can sort of sell it to. It's those key target voters. I just don't know what they think. And the other thing is PR, without it in the manifesto, is much trickier. But it is also possible. Hello. Could the pound drop below the euro? I mean, I'm not an economist. I mean, at some point in the future, I don't think that's imminent. You know, if anything, the pound hasn't dropped against the euro as much as against the dollar. You know, I think there's a bigger danger of parity with the dollar than with the euro. It shouldn't achieve parity with either. But I remember when I was a teenager and I went to Florida, and it was $2 to the pound. Now, you know, things change over time and all the rest of it. But, you know, that's not an inflationary thing because that's two relative currencies. You know, the pound is not far off parity with the dollar. I remember when it was $2 to the pound. But in time, all sorts of things can happen to the pound. If, you know, sometimes you can deliberately devalue the pound. Although I don't think anyone will want to do that. You say, bring back Corbyn and I'll go and fight for the party until vote day. You will not bring in anywhere near as many votes as Corbyn will lose. I'm sorry, that's just it. Are we into a run on sterling territory now? There are fears. Again, I'm not an economist. I tell you what I do notice. Like, you know, the Financial Times I've mentioned before, right? So the Financial Times is a bit of a weird beast for news because it's written for the rich, right? It's not on our side. It's absolutely not on our side. It's on the side of the people who own the country. It's on the side of investors. It is the paper for bankers and major investors. That's who it's for. So, for example, it's not very robust in its attacks on the cap being removed on bankers' bonuses, although it did say it's not really going to help. You know, they're quite pleased about the changes to planning permission. You know, the planning permission reforms they're quite happy about. So they're not on our side. But at the same time, it is a paper that has to tell its intended readership the truth. There's no point in trying to deceive people, because if they do not have the accurate information to make their investment decisions, those investment decisions will go badly wrong. And then the Financial Times has no customer base then. So it does have to tell the truth. And I'll tell you something, the Financial Times is as positive as a sensible media outlet can be about some of Kwarteng's speech, because it has picked out some things it approves of. But by and large, it is a tale of woe. It makes no bones about the fact that Kwasi Kwarteng's budget statement yesterday was an absolute disaster. That's the Financial Times. You find the Financial Times very fair-minded in their reporting. They're not fair-minded, they are biased like anyone else. It's just that they have to tell the truth as they understand it. You know, there are subjective things. They are biased, they're incredibly biased. As I say, you always have to read it as they're not trying to inform me. I read it because, you know, I get useful, accurate information there. I'll give you an example. Right. Good example here. The Financial Times, as a result of Kwarteng's budget statement, so Kwarteng and Liz Truss are basically trying to say that you know, cutting tax generates growth, right? Now it doesn't. The data shows otherwise. Now here's the thing: the Financial Times posted a little scattergraph, right? And it had various countries on it, and it charted GDP per capita against tax revenues, and it was a big old mess. There was no correlation there at all. And basically what they were saying is, there's no, you can't actually demonstrate that low taxes achieve high GDP per capita. Now I actually respond, when someone tweeted that, I actually responded, that was the FT cherry picking, because as some people will know, I did it again today. There's a particular chart I use on my videos when I talk about this, which if you put all the countries on it, it shows there is a correlation. There's a strong positive correlation between tax burden, as you would call it, and GDP per capita, and it's a positive correlation. So the countries with the highest tax burden have the highest GDP per capita. Now obviously that has to be based on the idea you spend those taxes on infrastructure, the things that allow businesses to grow, not give it all to Tory mates and donors. But nonetheless, there is actually, so the Financial Times didn't do that. So when you say the fair-minded, no, they're biased. They will cherry pick just like anyone else who's trying to present a point of view. They have a point of view. Their point of view is to try and encourage policies that benefit the financial markets, that benefit investors, that benefit bankers, right? That's their customer. And they lobby for their customer just like any other newspaper lobbies for their customer. It's just that with the reason why I say the Financial Times is honest is because the Financial Times customer are the people who buy the Financial Times. So they have to be honest. The Daily Mail's customer are the people who buy the Financial Times, not the people who buy the Daily Mail. So the Daily Mail is deeply dishonest. FT has backed Labour before 92-97. The FT, you may be surprised to learn, wrote a very positive article about Jeremy Corbyn's plans before the 2019 general election. They also savaged the fact that it was sort of effectively uncosted, which it, to a certain extent it was. It wasn't as badly out as Boris Johnson's. The problem with it is he kept putting in plans for multiple parliaments, which is always a bad idea, because then you basically allow the right wing to claim that your plans cost too much and it's not adding up with your intended tax revenues. Therefore, you must be planning on increasing taxes on the sly, which was more literally true of the Tories. But that again is why, you know, people are getting het up about things that Starmer is saying. It's why you have to understand what they say is for a parliament. If you try and go, yes, we'd like them to put in much longer term plans, but if you start talking about them, the right-wing press will start asking about costs, and they will calculate it as if it's all going to be paid on day one of them winning power. Right? So you have to deal with that. Falling the euro is energy price driven. Once that calms out, it'll rise again. Sterling falling is systemic now. Well, I mean, as I say, it wasn't just that the currency dropped yesterday. The arse fell out the bonds market, and that for me is more of a worry, because Liz Truss is planning on spending for her tax cuts and the energy plan and various other things as well. It's been worked out, because she's not saying how much it's costing. It's been worked out between 130 billion and 200 billion pounds. Now that's massive, and all of it's borrowing. All of it's going on the national debt. None of it is being raised from windfall tax or anything like that, because it's tax cuts. And it's not just net tax cuts, it's tax cuts, no tax rises. So, you know, she's spending up to 200 billion pounds. Now that's all borrowing. Now to borrow, they don't just go to the bank and ask for money, because if they did, well, they could. You could have quantitative easing, but then you devalue the pound then anyway. So anyway, but arguably quantitative easing would be a better way through this. But no, she's planning on borrowing, which means selling more government bonds than there currently are. But the arse fell out of the bonds market. Investors were trying to get rid of them. They're worried. I've missed my comment. Sorry, Em, I often do it. Should I repost again? You could try and repost it again, and we'll try and see it again. You can assess the masses' general vibe by looking at what TV they consume and what content. Narrative is pushed through that. Early 2K and shows like 24, etc. were huge influences in public opinion. Yeah, I don't watch television these days. I've had enough of it. Have I seen the Al Jazeera Labour file leaks? And if so, how do I think it'll affect the public opinion of Labour and chance of winning? I haven't. I don't know what you're talking about. So I've very much not have. How will it affect public opinion of Labour? Not at all. And chances of winning. I mean, I don't even know what it is. But if I've not heard of it, I'm going to suggest that a lot of people won't have either. You know, Al Jazeera obviously does have a lot of people. I mean, I've watched it or read the website from time to time when I want, but usually I go for it when I want stories on particular things. What do I think of the tax cuts the Tories are dishing out? How many people will benefit from them? 629,000 people. It won't do the economy any good at all now. It can't. Like I said, the core thing is this. Their core idea, and they've explained this, is not me paraphrasing, this is what they're suggesting. They are suggesting that if you cut taxes for the very rich, they will spend the money saved on employing more people, so more jobs, or they'll spend it on giving their workers pay increases. No, this has never happened. You know, if you think about it, if you own a business, what would encourage you to employ more people? Well, if you had to expand that business, that's what does it. Not tax breaks. If you have to expand, and why would you expand your business? Because you can't meet up with demand, so you need to increase production to be able to satisfy the high demand. That's the only, the business will expand. And if your business is ready to expand, if it's able to expand, then you will do that. You're not gonna think, oh, I've not got enough money to. You would go to the bank and you would get a loan to expand your business. Or if it's a large business, you'd get investors to buy shares in it. You know, you do not make expansion decisions on your business based on whether or not you've had a little tax cut. And as for paying your workers more, again, what is it that encourages you to pay your workers more? The risk of losing workers. Workers telling you, I'm going to go and work somewhere else because they pay me more money, so you have to pay them more money. That's what does it. So on no level does tax cuts realistically include more investment. There is a case for things like corporation tax, where if a particular business, a corporation, I didn't talk about this in the video today because it would have gone on for too long, but if a large corporation, for example, wants to invest, and when I say invest, I mean set up a factory or headquarters or something, and maybe it's choosing different countries, and we'd like them to build it in Britain, say. But you still got to think, well, they might, for lower corporation tax, set it up in the UK as opposed to France, maybe. But if what they're producing can't be sold to their customers in Europe, they're still not going to do it. So the net result is still that cutting taxes isn't going to attract net investment and net investment growth, because we're shutting any company that builds here, we're shutting them off from customers around the world, especially in Europe. So the theory is bonkers. You're anticipating Tories coming out with something new and unexpected. What they've put on the table, not a winning proposition, and no one sees much differently as tax. Well, again, this is what, right. Liz Truss has built a cabinet that's very right wing. Some of them inevitably will believe, right, in their heads, some of their heads, that's what I mean about are they mad or just pretending. Some of them are mad. Some of them in their heads are certain this will work. They're certain this will work. They're certain that come the next election, they will have something to show the public that they've got it right. They may not think they'll have completely transformed the economy, but they will, in their own heads, think two things. First, that they'll have something to show for it, those green shoots. Second, that it will be enough to convince the public to vote for them again. Remember, they can afford to lose some MPs. They've got a large majority. They don't have to, Liz Truss doesn't have to win as many seats as Boris Johnson did. She just needs to win a few more. In fact, given that Tories are generally more disciplined, they're better at that sort of public show of unity, she can get away with a smaller majority and still effectively govern than, say, Keir Starmer could with Labour. This budget hasn't been labelled a Singapore on the Thames budget, was it? Not that I've seen, no. I've seen it characterised as all sorts of things, but not that yet. For that, you'd need a massive amount of deregulation, which they keep threatening, but there's still... Well, there are sort of plans. Their plans on the deregulation is to get Parliament... There's a bill being put to Parliament which would allow the government ministers to change the law without having to go to Parliament first. Okay, so it would allow the government to change laws that could mean remove it, not just any old law, certain laws, but quite a lot of them, that would allow them, for example, to change regulations overnight. You know, like they did during coronavirus. Parliament gave the government powers to enact certain types of legislation under the aegis of statutory instruments, which allowed them to create new laws, create new criminal offences even overnight. The government literally with the pandemic created new criminal offences 20 minutes. They published them 20 minutes before they went live. So zero time for normal members of the public or even the police to actually realise that suddenly the law had changed. They're getting Parliament to give them that power on a more wide-ranging basis, so that they can do things without going to Parliament. Now, for the government, that has several advantages. First of all, it means they don't have to worry about rebellious Tory MPs who might vote against it. And you think, well, why would Tory MPs do it? Well, from their point of view, it's also good, because it means they can't be linked with any vote for an unpopular move. If the government do something, it's less likely to get scrutiny, because there won't have been a debate in Parliament or records of voting in Parliament, and therefore those Tory backbenchers' hands are clean. So it does. So they probably will get the bill through, unless again the House of Lords stop it. But the thing is, we can't expect the House of Lords to basically block every bill that goes through Parliament. They really shouldn't be blocking very many at all. It should be a very rare thing. It's just the current government are producing quite a lot that are frankly unconstitutional. But anyway, don't need the Cayman Islands, Panama anymore. They do, but the plan is not to. Yeah, the plan is absolutely to make London that. So like you wouldn't even need to bother. I mean, they're free enterprise zones, the free ports, which may become charter cities in the future. You know. Truss built a government that's intrinsically fascist. I would say, to be fair, Johnson did. Truss just inherited it. If you look at the current cabinet, it's basically, there are some differences, but it's largely musical chairs. Most of Liz Truss's cabinet were in Boris Johnson's cabinet. There are some new ones, and there are some old ones gone. But by and large, it's the same people. What are the chances of deregulating the banks? The thing, I honestly at this point don't even know. Boris Johnson, there was a lot of things he said he would do, like in terms of getting rid of regulation, stuff like that, and you could tell he sort of believed it, but you could also tell that he did listen to people enough to be, you know, and if he was told this is going to be a disaster for these reasons, he would sort of balk at the idea. Liz Truss could actually be completely insane. And at this point, I actually wouldn't put anything past her. I am prepared to believe that, again, if I come back to those three possibilities. So Liz Truss believes in this economic lunacy. Liz Truss doesn't believe in it, but she's only doing it for her own personal position to be Prime Minister for a couple of years and then sod the rest of the party. Or third, that she thinks it's impossible. She's doing it for the party. She thinks it's impossible to win the next election, crash the economy, so that Labour can't do very much about it, and then the Labour have to deal with all their mess, all the, you know, the poisoned well, and leave them for a few years to improve things a bit, and then point out how disastrous they've been, and then come back in. Even if it's in 10 years' time, come back in and have another 15 years of like, you know, snouts in the trough again. Because for, you know, for long-term investors, remember, the Tory party is the party of the ultra-rich investor, not a wealth creator. It's not the party of business. Some people thought it was. John Major, their leader, the Prime Minister at one time, thought it was. It was never the party of business. It's always, that's why he had battles all the time, because the party ultimately is the party of people who make money from wealth creators but do not themselves create wealth. And those take a long-term view. They're quite happy to make out like bandits for 10 or 15 years, then go into hibernation for another 10 years while Labour in power. They're fine with that. They will resist moves, of course. They'll try and restrict Labour. They'll use their media influence to restrict what Labour can do to limit the damage, but they'll ultimately be quite happy just to hibernate a bit, wait for the Tories to come back into power, and then it's back, cha-ching, back to the cash machine. You know, so it's entirely possible that Liz Truss is just doing that. She's just getting to the point where she goes, right, we've consumed the country. We've basically eaten it all up. Let's let Labour back in to grow the economy a bit. Then we'll take advantage of it when they inevitably lose again. You know, and Labour will always, I mean, all parties will inevitably lose at some point. They'll just eat each other. You know, Labour are no different to the Tories in that at some point they'll have been in power for so long that they'll get complacent, and the infighting will stop them being able to be effective. And the problem is that sometimes with Labour that can happen on day one. You know, it can happen on day one. There'll be people in Labour who, as soon as Keir Starmer is confirmed as Prime Minister, will go, right, we're in power now, let's do this, this, this and this. And it's like, yeah, do you want to lose the next election? And what's really crazy is they'll think no matter what, they'll be protected and get away with this. I'm not actually sure what that is in reference to, but if it's in terms of the Tories, they probably will. I know you can look at America and you can look at the fact that the net seems to be closing in on a few people, including Donald Trump and his family and Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani. But most of them getting away with it. You were not going to see like 200 Republicans in prison. We may not see any. We may not see any. And again, in this country, similar sort of thing. I mean, in America, you've at least got a sort of independent crime agency, whereas we don't really here, because the government were perfectly able to threaten its funding to get the National Crime Agency to behave itself, as well as the Metropolitan Police. She'll not be prepared to concede defeat. She'll prefer to posit a worse options than lose by default. I really don't know what she'll be thinking. You know, again, you're looking at someone who has adopted a very far right-wing position for whatever reason and is committed to it. Because what was announced this week, it wasn't just what she said she would do during the Tory leadership contest. It was more extreme. I can't emphasize that enough. It was more extreme than what she promised. And, you know, you think to yourself, it's almost like what, and that's very telling, because she's done things that she didn't promise to do to party members. So that means what she's done right here is further to the right than even the average Tory party member. It's like she was holding some things back because she thought it would be too crazy even for Tory party members. That's where she is. She's not doing this just to keep she could have done less than this and still kept the far right of the party and the Tory party membership on side. She could have done less and kept them on side. Now she's doing this because, well, I don't know. But, you know, I'm prepared to believe because she genuinely thinks it's the right thing to do. Whatever that definition of right is, I don't know. It's certainly not for the common good, obviously. But, you know, either for the party, for the economy, for herself, I don't know. But I don't think, like, people just, you know, you could sort of take it, you know, people think, oh, she's just a puppet of the ERG. Maybe she's not. Maybe she's a willing partner of the ERG. She could well be a more than willing partner of the ERG. But anyway, there we go. We will see. We will see in time, I suppose. But mad times coming ahead. Mad times coming. Unfortunately, we don't get a PMQs for ages. There's no PMQs next week, or the week after, or the week after that. 19. I'm going to have to check again. I'm pretty sure it's 19th of October for the next PMQs, for which Starmer's just going to get it wherever, isn't he? Because he's only got 6 questions, and no matter what he decides to focus on, there'll be people go, well, why didn't you talk about that? Why didn't you talk about that? It's like, you know, he'll have too much to do. He'll have far too much. But anyway, Labour Party conference going on at the moment, so we'll see how that goes. And then Tory Party conference, when is that? Is that the following week? Yeah, that's the following week. So then we'll see how that goes. And then we'll see what happens then. But have a good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for coming. Until next time, I'll see you later.